Hi everyone, Julia here from The Art of Creating, and I'm back again with another watercolor tutorial. In this video, I'm showing you how I've painted this ocean wave. I'm going to work on the painting in 3 stages. First, I'm going to go through the middle part of the painting, which is the ocean wave itself. And then I'm going to do the bottom bit where the water is mixed with a bit of foam and the sand. And then the top part of the painting where the water is a little bit richer in color. I've sketched out a rough outline where the ocean wave is, just identifying the different sections of the wave and where it's folding down and starts to foam up a little bit so that I know where to put in the color and where to leave out some highlights for the sea foam and the white parts and the water sprays and just those lighter bits. I'm working on the main part of the wave first, just going through and putting in the different colors, just identifying the shape of the wave, which section of a wave it's more of a darker color where the water hasn't folded over itself yet, and the other bits where it starts to fold over and break and starts to have a lot of foam and the spray on it. And then also leaving out and then adding in the areas where it's got a bit of a brown in it, which is like the sand and all the stuff that the ocean wave is bringing with it. For the paper, I'm using A4 size rough watercolor paper, and for the paint, I'm using White Nights paint set. For the colors, I'm using a combination of greens and blues, so a bit of azure and ultramarine, which is the colors from the paint set, and a little bit of turquoise, and then I've also mixed a light beige brown kind of a color using a bit of burnt sienna with umber and a little bit of pink in it as well, just to give it a bit of a reddish tone. And I'm just going through and just marking out the sections where those different colors are, and then I'm just going to go in with a bit of water and blend those colors in together so that it doesn't look like the colors are all separate, and just smooths out the edges a little bit. I'm not too worried about leaving the light areas out because I'm going to go in with white gouache and add white on top of the painting when I'm finished with the color. However, it makes it a little bit easier to see if I try to leave out those lighter areas, and it just makes my job a little bit easier at the final stage. I'm using a reference photo for this, so in the reference photo those dark brown colors were fairly rich. I'm assuming it's just sort of picking up all that sand and everything in it, and where the wave folds over itself ready to break, it's got a bit of a shadow behind it. That's why those colors are looking a bit darker than they would say if it was just in the water. The tops of the waves also seem to be a little bit darker, so I'm adding a richer kind of dark green turquoise color, and I've just mixed a little bit of Payne's Grey into it just to add that darkness and a bit of blue in it, as Payne's Grey is a grey with blue, so it's nice to mix into the areas where you do want that blue tone. Once I've identified and laid down all of my colors in the wave, I've re-wetted the middle section a little bit because the middle part of the wave, that whole kind of line of it, seems to be in a bit of a highlight. So I've wetted that area and just dabbed it a little bit with a tissue just to remove a bit of that color and leave a highlight. And then I'm just going through with my brush, just smoothing it out so that it doesn't look like the middle section had color removed in it, and then everything else is just a solid color. So just to smooth it out a little bit. I'm also using my brush at an angle to get in those smaller lines, and I'm using a nice fluid movement with my wrist to curve my brush up or down, depending on whether I'm going from the top of the wave down into the middle or from the bottom of the wave up into that middle section. And I'm creating those lines to give the indication of how the water is moving and how the wave is curving onto itself. I've added a bit more brown to the bottom of the wave where the brown tones are a little bit richer, and that's where the bottom section of the wave is, where it starts meeting a slightly calmer part of the water. That's the water where it's kind of mixed with a bit of sand, maybe some rocks there, and a bit of foam from the previous waves as they've been sort of breaking and foaming up that section in front of it. I'm starting with just adding a bit of light blue to indicate the different small ripples and waves in the water. And I'm going through over it multiple times, just adding more color, adding more detail. I'm not too worried about it matching exactly to the reference photo. I've just gotten an idea of how the water is looking, where it's got all the brown tones, and I've just sort of added them in around that section of the water in front of the wave, just adding a bit more and more color as I go and identifying the water movement, where the water is sort of a little bit curving over itself and that section is a little bit in shadow, so a little bit darker in some sections, a little bit lighter in other sections, especially where the foam and all that white of the water is, and just mixing it all in. At the moment it's looking fairly dark at the bottom, especially the brown, but I'm going to go over it with a fair bit of white so it will lighten up quite significantly. Then I'm leaving the bottom part to dry and I'm working on the top section of the painting. So that's not the sky, that is also water, and it's a little bit darker and a little bit greenier than the part in front of the wave. So the back of it doesn't have any of that sand visible and not that much foam either. So all the foam is kind of in front of the wave. So it's got more darker green colors in it because the water is deeper and it's got richer colors in those little waves. I'm working wet on wet here just to blend out some of those darker sections, and then as I go and layer it up, they will become a little bit more defined. While I'm leaving the top section to dry before I do another layer, I'm going back to the bottom section to add my second layer there. Just adding a light wash of blue just to smooth everything out and making sure that I don't have any white gaps where I don't want it, because I'm going to go back in with white gouache and add those white foam and the white ripples in the water where I do want them, how the water is moving. So I'm covering the whole section there with a light wash of blue so that I've got a nice base to start with. Then I'm adding again a bit more brown for the whether it's rocks or sand, I'm not quite sure, but if I did this painting again, I probably wouldn't go as dark because I did need to go with a couple of layers of white gouache to lighten it up. I didn't quite like how it looked just because it was taking the attention away from the wave, and I want the wave itself to be the focal point. So if you are doing this at home, if you are following my my tutorial, just don't go quite as dark with your browns and you'll just save yourself some time at a later stage. And now that my top bit is dry, I'm back to adding a bit more detail So I'm just grabbing a little bit darker mix with some green and some blue, and I'm adding those little water ripples where the sections look a little bit darker. And going by the reference photo, about 2/3 horizontally, 2/3 of that section is darker, and the 1/3 to the right is much lighter in color, so it doesn't have anywhere near as much green in it. It's more of a lighter blue, so that might be how it's highlighted with the sun or when the photo was taken. That's just how the colors are. And I've tried to repeat that with my brush and my paint colors. Now it's time for adding some highlights and pretty much the detail of the painting, and most of it is like the detail is mostly in the wave, but then we're also going to add a fair bit of white to the front portion of the ocean or the water, and that's going to lighten up that section and look like it's more foamy sort of a water. Going by the reference photo, mostly white highlight is at the top of the wave. Then there's a few water splatters there in different sections as the water is hitting other parts of the water, and all the water is spraying up and foaming up. So that's where most of your white is, especially where the wave folds over itself ready to break. That's where the most foam and the most water splatter is. And I'm just going through with my brush and just adding the white gouache to it. So with the white gouache, it's like watercolor paint, but it's more opaque. So the thicker you use it, the more opaque it is. But if you dilute it with water a fair bit, it becomes more like watercolor paint. So it becomes more transparent. The thing with gouache is, especially white gouache, is it dries duller than it actually is. So if you have it fairly opaque and fairly thick, it will dry fairly bright white. However, if it's diluted a fair bit, when you apply it to the paper, it looks very white and very bright, but when it dries, it will become a lot duller. So you might need to go back with quite a few layers and build it up. And I'm using a combination of brushes. I'm using a small round brush to add those lines and details in. And then I'm also going to use a fan brush just to add, to make my job a little bit quicker and easier, and to make it a little bit more natural where the water is curving. And I want to add those white kind of lines, how the water is folding over itself. And then I'm also going to use a stiffer brush to create the splatters on the page as well. And you'll notice here, because the white gouache starts to reactivate the paint underneath a little bit, it is important to do it in stages. So if you go over your painted area, so say the area with green and blue in it, you need to let that layer dry because it will kind of start looking like pastel green. So you need to let it dry completely to go in with another color if you want that area to look opaque. So in some areas we want it to be nice and opaque and bright, and in other areas we need to see the color that's coming up underneath because our wave is not solid, it's transparent. So you can see some colors underneath, and some areas are nice and bright and you can't see the color. After adding some of the white, I wanted to intensify some more colors in the wave. So I've just grabbed my paint out again and go over those areas and darken up some sections and just add some movement and lights, some movements and lines to add back that detail that might have been lost when I've added the white gouache. Especially the section on the right hand side at the top of the wave that it's folding over itself, because the top of it does have some green visible through it. So I need to add that top section back in, and then I'll add a bit more white gouache to the bottom just to create more contrast. That's it for our painting. I hope you enjoyed it. I know ocean waves can be a little bit tricky, but it just takes a bit of practice, especially if you take a tutorial to get a bit of guidance with your colors and how to approach it. So if you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe to my channel to see more videos like this in the future. Have a great day, and I will see you in my next video.